Hello, today I'm going to show you the second game between Hamppe and Steinitz. Hamppe, who was a very strong Swiss chess master, twice champion of Vienna, Austria, and Steinitz, who later became the first world chess champion. So Hamppe playing with white begins with e4, e5, the usual beginning of trying to get hold on the center. And as was in the 19th century style, starting with the king gambit, offering a pawn to the opponent immediately in the start of the game, and Steinitz accepted gladly. The usual moves of the king gambit continue. Bishop c4. You see white takes out two pieces already, and blacks develops the black bishop to g7. White castles, till now very energetically, and blacks defends the g5 pawn with his h6 move. Now, first surprise, instead of the d4 move, which takes hold of the center completely, you see all those squares are dominated by the pawns. White chose d3, which is less aggressive, not in the style of this opening, and black's answer d6. Now the black-white bishop is able to get out to join the game, and black stand perfectly well with a pawn more. Now white continues trying to demolish this pawn chain and to give access in the F line in the F file to his rook. Modern chess player would be amazed that such a strong player weakens his king's defense, but this is the mid-19th century, a totally different style. And black answers g4, not only attacking the knight, but if the knight moves, let's say, to e1, black can continue with f3. Now he has a very strong hold in the white territory, restricting white movement and having a passed pawn, which is all very, very well. But surprise, white decides to sacrifice also the knight and takes the pawn with his bishop. So g takes f3, queen takes f3. Now white has a piece that he has given, but a very strong attack. Just for example, if black does something stupid like a6, this could be a very, very dangerous attack. Why? Because first of all, white is threatening mat on f7. You see the queen is supported by the rook. The bishop is also targeting f7. And of course, white also threatens the bishop on g7. So this is just one example, but black could play knight to c6, prevent this. Why? Because if knight c6, bishop e5, knight takes the bishop, and the f7 pawn is protected by the knight. So the whole idea of mate in f7 doesn't work. But black decided to play queen e7. protecting the f7 pawn in another fashion. So knight c3, bishop e6. Now there is a thumb rule. If you are a piece up, change pieces. So the advantage that you have is actually bigger. If you change all the pieces, theoretically, you remain with one piece more. Now many pieces are on the board, but if you start to change them, you will remain with the piece up, and it will be much more remarked. So one idea could be bishop d4 check, the king moves, or the bishop comes here, we change the bishops, and still we have one piece more, and the number of pieces is diminished. But Black decided Black decided another thing. He didn't change the bishop for the knight. He played bishop e6. The problem with bishop e6 is that now white could play e5. What is the idea of e5? Threatening the b7 pawn, and it's quite a threat. Also threatening the d6 pawn. It's not only the pawn, it's also opening the e file. So the king, queen, and bishop are on the same file. It's quite dangerous. But white didn't do it, but threatened the queen with knight d5. Queen retreats to d7, still protecting the pawn. Now everything is good. And white continues to develop his army. Now the rook is in front of the king. Of course, the pawn and the bishop are still here. Knight c6. Knight c6 not only develops a piece, but also prepares the long castle. So c3, and indeed the black castles. Now the king is safe. White attacks in the center is meaningless, and black is only one piece, one move. In one move, he will be able to develop his last piece and be prepared to start his attack. After black's castle in the queen's side, white begins an attack on the queen's side, but it will take a long time to move all the pawns and threaten the black king, while black can advance his h pawn and threaten the white king's position. Remember that the g file is open, and black can easily bring the other rook and threaten the king. So after a4, black develops his last piece, knight g to e7. Now he's ready to move the rooks to advance the pawn, and white continues his advancement, but it's slow. h5 and b4. h4, already threatening the g pawn. a5. Black takes the g pawn, bishop takes the g pawn, and rook from d to g8. Now both rooks are threatening the king's flank. Very dangerous attack. White comes with rook to a1, hoping for an attack on the queen's side, but it's too slow, as I said. Bishop takes d5, exchanging one piece, and opening the way of the queen to h3. which is also very, very important. E takes d5, and regardless on the attack on the knight, black goes queen to h3. What is the threat? If black moves his bishop, doesn't matter where, the threat is queen takes h2 mate. Why? Because if the bishop is not here, this bishop is unable to move because the rook will threaten the king. We'll see this immediately. And indeed, white takes the knight. So now both have two pieces. White has the bishop pair and black has the bishop and the knight. But blacks find an ingenious way to threaten the mate. So bishop goes from g7 to d4, check. Now just look what happens if white takes the bishop. This is mate. Why this is mate? Because the bishop cannot move. You see it's pinned because the rook would threaten the king. So, of course, white doesn't do it, but moves with the king to h1. Rook takes the bishop. Why can't the queen take the rook? For the same reason. If queen takes the rook, queen takes the queen, and the pawn cannot take the queen. It's also pinned by the rook. So this is not a possibility. And the threat, of course, is now mate on h2. So white goes queen to e2. Sorry. White first gives a check on b7. The king moves. And now the queen protects the h2 pawn protects the h by going to e2. Bishop goes to e5. And again, the threat is if you move the rook, three pieces are threatening the h2 pawn. The rook, the queen, and also the bishop. The rook comes to the defense of the h2 pawn, and knight f5 joins all the other pieces with a very interesting threat. If the rook moves, there is a threat of going to g3, queen, king. It's a fork, because again, the pawn is pinned. So knight f5, the queen goes to f1, hoping to exchange queens. Beautiful move, rook g1. This is really a beauty. What happens here? If queen takes the rook, knight goes to g3 check. The only legal move is queen takes the knight, and now we can take the queen and remain with a queen on against the rook, which is totally lost. Okay, so king takes the rook. Now bishop takes h2. If I take with the rook, queen takes h2, it's mate. So the king has no option but to return here to h1. And now try to find the mate in one move. I hope that you will succeed to find it. I will wait a few seconds. You can stop the video until you are sure of yourself. Okay, the beautiful mate is knight g3. A real beauty attacking style game. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll meet at the next game.